Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am Misty Luminais. I'm here with Leslye Huff. We're doing a community researcher interview for the Voicing in Action project. It is October 13th, 2014, and we are in Leslie's home. So we're going to start out really broad. Can you describe your experiences with the Voicing in Action project?
Well, they've been very interesting, first of all, and varied. I had an opportunity to sit as a part of the steering committee to talk about some of the ideas that might be moved forward to use the results of the project for the benefit of our community. I've Thanks to the Voicing in Action project, I have been able to go to other research-oriented activities, learn some more things about ethics. I'm a lawyer, so ethics is, in our profession, is mandatory. You have to take CLEs each year on ethics and professionalism, but drilling down more deeply into research was beneficial to me personally. And it's also something that's important to me generally. So I've been acquainted and met some people who are doing research, and I value that really highly. The project itself has been an experience of kind of a devotion. The people who started out with us, almost all of them are still with us, working together to interview people. We give our time essentially to that effort. There's diligence, and as I was putting on this top, I was thinking of the Lady Red and her activities. Each person has sort of given a delightful piece of themselves to the project, and a particular and unique insight as to what the interviewees are sharing with us. The idea of giving your time to express your take on the conditions of East Cleveland and your relationship to it is an idea that must be supported by courage, because we all live in this community and we know that the information that we share is going to be a part of the public view. So that's a step of courage. And so I applaud the interviewees and I applaud the interviewers. Basically, that's how I felt about it. Oh, there's one more thing. Taking the attitudes and the perspectives of the interviewees and sort of filtering them through a sincere hope for the good of the people of East Cleveland. When you come out on the other end, you don't know what you're going to get, but you want it to be something that will be of benefit to the people, to the environment that we live in. And I guess the way I've expressed that indicates that I'm not talking about the city proper. I'm really talking about the people. And so that's my take on your question.
So has your experience with the Voicing in Action project changed your perception of the city or the people in the city?
Well, probably everything that I do, wherever I do it, changes me in some way. So I'm assuming yes. I'm not exactly sure in what ways yet it has changed me, but I'm sure it has changed my perspective on the city. I think I expected already of more of a variety than many people might think of when they think of East Cleveland. I think I had probably fewer stereotypes of the city as a whole, or the people in the city, I should put it that way. And so, experiencing the varieties of people who gave their interviews, and experiencing the group of people, most of whom I did not know before we started this project, has been new for me, but I expected it to be new. So.
Did anything change about your sense of how people feel about the city? Like, prior to the project, did you feel like people were engaged and wanted to make a change, or that people had felt hopeless and kind of apathetic, or like, and we heard both of those views represented in the interviews. Did that sway you in either direction?
Ooh, I'm usually an and person rather than an or person. So I wrote on Facebook one day when I was feeling particularly annoyed about East Cleveland in some way or other. I wrote, "It is so difficult being seeing the numbers of people who want to help East Cleveland continue as a city and prosper. At the same time, the city seems so bent on self-destruction." And those people who want the good of East Cleveland, are both citizens of East Cleveland and people outside. So I think I continue to experience both sides of things. I usually never feel hopeless, but if by hopeless you mean the city won't survive, I feel that it may not survive, but I don't think that doesn't cause me to feel hopeless. Maybe I'm not explaining myself very well, but if your focus is on the good of the people, which is my focus, I would prefer it to survive, but it wouldn't. It doesn't equate to the people not surviving.
Can we stop for a second? All right, thank you.
Sure.
So switching gears a little bit, what skills have you learned because of the project?
Oh, the camera. That's one good skill. I shared with some friends a couple of nights ago that I made a video, and I had no camera skills at all at the time. I still don't have many, but at least I know how to turn it on and set it up and all of those kinds of. Still haven't managed to learn how to wrap the cord. That may seem silly, but it is a way of protecting the equipment and keeping it safe. I think my interviewing skills have improved. I know that on self-reflection, I know that I had a tendency to talk more than I do now when I'm interviewing someone. So that's been helpful to me, to talk less, but to make sure that I ask questions that elicit further response.
So I know in your professional life that you're an attorney. How has interviewing been different for you than taking a deposition?
Or any other engagement with...
Or like an intake, like what you would do with an intake with a client or something.
Well, they're not that different, to tell you the truth. At least not for me. What I try to do when I interview a prospective client, let's say someone calls and they have a need and I think I can maybe help them, I have them come in first before they sign a retainer with me. And we have what I call, it doesn't matter what I call it. It's a kind of a pre-interview that I just let them pay a flat fee, and then they talk to me and tell me what the issue is as they see it. And I set enough time aside so that they don't have to feel hurried. And the reason I do it that way is because so few people feel heard. And we lawyers know that there are elements we have to look for to determine whether a case is valuable and can be adjudicated or not. Very often it's hard to find all of the pieces. So a lawyer's time is very valuable. But in the long run, if you let people just share out how they feel, then you can give them an overall perspective on what the benefit is to them in moving in one direction or another. And sometimes going into court isn't the way. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's not worth it. Sometimes you have a valuable case in your heart, but the cost is too high. So it costs both mental, financial, and time-wise. So in that sense, I allow my first interview to be open-ended and with a lot of open-ended questions. I get the basics, of course, the who, what, where, and when, but I let them express themselves. And so in this sense, the Voicing in Action project is similar in that we're sitting down together, let's say the interviewee and me, and we're trying to determine how they see themselves in the city, and is there anything that they can do to make their position in the city more valuable to them. So that's basically what lawyers do, and determining what routes to take or what they're willing to take as a way of ameliorating their situation, making it a little better. That's what we're doing. Moving toward action.
Well, I will say that your first interview was very different than your last interview. I think part of that might be the person that you were interviewing in particular, but it seemed like you graduated more towards a conversational tone rather than really pursuing. And again, I think it might have had to do with the choice of your interviewee. But your first one was definitely like, we are going to answer this question and there's no avoiding it. Which had its benefit as well. I think that you got some incredible detail.
I believe my first interview, though, was my spouse. and I know that she has I know her. So I knew her well enough to know when there were things that she could say that she just was not quite ready to put forth, and so I gave her many opportunities. Mm-hmm. Which do you think was more effective in terms of, I'm asking for feedback now, which was more effective in getting the information that we need to move this project forward?
I think they were both effective in different ways. I think that because you knew your spouse so well, you were able to get some incredible historical detail that really helped us frame what was going on in Cleveland and East Cleveland during that time of white flight. Okay, we'll just pause.
Wait, you paused it?
So I think we were talking about your different kinds of interviewing styles, and I think that, but when you interviewed Mississippi Bevel, that more free-flowing kind of interview also took us in places that I don't think you expected, and I certainly didn't expect.
No.
So I think that both of those, when you knew where the destination was, you elicited some good information, but at the same time, when you were able to just go with what was happening, we also got some incredible stuff that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise. And I think that your ability to kind of follow up on things that were just mentioned really helped us as far as the project went. So.
Oh, great. I'm glad I was helpful.
Yes.
That's good.
Um, so how do you feel like the setting of the interview impacted the interview?
Well, I really enjoyed interviewing people in their own homes. First of all, I think it gives them a sense of control and safety, presuming that they felt me coming into their home was safe, and they did. And so they felt more free to just share their opinion. There were some people who liked to show me their home, so they wanted me to see them in the context of their living space. And others, it was just convenient. So I came in and set up the camera and tried to bring lighting, actually, so that they wouldn't feel encumbered by finding, appropriate lighting for me. So I didn't interview anyone outside of their homes. It's interesting, not even once.
Well, I think it's interesting you say that, though, because I know at the beginning of the project, people felt really resistant into going into people's homes. That was something that we had talked about, and I think that for future researchers, it's going to be good to hear people talk about how important it is, or how much it facilitated the interview to actually be in people's homes. Because I know at the beginning people felt weird about it.
Well, it facilitated it for me, and actually, it's ironic that it did, because in public gatherings of a different kind, meetings where people were speaking out about problems in East Cleveland, for example, one of the deterrents to having block clubs was that they didn't want to meet in each other's homes. They didn't feel comfortable or safe walking in, having all those folks, they would say, walking into the home. And I heard folks say that, and I never felt that way about my house, but I've heard other people say it. So my preference all along would be to interview someone in their own home, or if not there, then in some very neutral place, a place just set up for interviews. Not at the library, for example. I wouldn't go there. But also it would have to be a place where the interviewee, is most comfortable. And for me, it was their homes. So.
And then can you talk a little bit about the lighting that you brought with? Because I think that's a good point.
Oh, yeah. I have this portable lighting light that is high. It's very hot. So I bounce it off the ceiling a lot so that the light can be kind of evenly divided. And for the most part, it was very helpful in getting a good, regardless of whether there were windows or, it seemed to help a lot. There was one time when I didn't use it, and I really wish I had, but it was the best I could do.
How cumbersome is that? Like, if we were going to invest in something like
Well,
that, like if you had, because it's about the same size as the tripod and the camera put together. So if you were carrying the camera and that light,
I was able to carry it all. In fact, the first time I did an interview outside of the house, I carried an extension cord as well, because I'd forgotten there was one in the case, and I had it. So I had it in the car all packed up, and then when I got the camera, I realized there was a thing in it. So, but I managed. This one's is heavy duty because it's made for doing projects in the garage and that sort of thing. But I'm sure you could get a lighter weight one that would work very well. I just thought it was important to have one in case, so you don't want people to have to feel like they have to produce a lamp if they're not, because they're not thinking about what the lighting's going to be like in their home. They just want to be there comfortably.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. What would you do to prepare for an interview?
Go through the questions again so that I am feeling so comfortable with them they can become conversational. I know that there were different styles. Some people did the biographical information in writing ahead of time, and some people did it on camera. I sort of tried to blend it in mostly. I hope it didn't cause you a problem, but I tried to blend it into the conversation so that people felt just like they were just talking to me.
Well, I think as far as the biographical sheet goes, just from a data collection point, it's easier to have them all extracted. But I was somebody else that I interviewed actually mentioned, and I'm just going to run this by you, that the African American community is more of an oral tradition community, and so people would be comfortable giving that information in conversation, but not necessarily writing it down. Is that something?
Yeah,
you found?
that's what I felt, and that's why I did it that way. I'm not sure whether it's just the African American community, but I think people generally will, tell you about their brother, but they don't want to watch you write his name down and his address and his telephone number and that sort of thing, or his age or his birth date or whatever. So, yeah, I think the conversational style is productive. I know it makes it a little bit more difficult to dig out the information, but that just means you watch the whole interview, whether you like it or not, I guess.
That's not a problem. I watched them all. I've watched them all like 3 times now.
Have you really?
So, yes.
Wow, that's nice.
It is nice. I feel really close to all of the data, but
That's a lot of interviews to watch.
yeah, we're at about 130 hours right now.
So no television or movies for you. You just had it right there.
Well,
I wanted to see them.
well, we can make that happen if you want to go through. We can get you a selection of interviews.
Yeah.
But I mean, like the process went like I watched them all to review them, and then I watched them all to take notes on them, and then I have to watch them all to code them. So I'm in the coding phase right now. So it's not true to say that I've watched all of them 3 times, but I've watched all of them at least twice. So
That's still an awful lot.
it is.
Yeah.
And it's been enjoyable in ways that I didn't expect. Like, it was frustrating at first because people weren't asking the questions that I would have asked, and I was like, no, wait. But, like, I've since learned to enjoy that different perspective because they ask questions that I wouldn't have asked.
Yeah.
So once I got over, like, wanting to be in control of everything, it's actually really enjoyable to listen to other people interview and to get the stories of the people that are talking. But it was a process.
I have a question for you then. Pick one of the interviews I did, whichever one you remember, and tell me about the questions you would have asked that I didn't.
Well, I think Almeida's interview, I would have been more interested in her experiences as a woman being in city government, and like what that meant, like whether or not she'd experienced any sexism. And that's because like I'm a gender specialist, and she's got a very forthright character.
Oh yes.
And so I was wondering, especially because she's so direct, I'm interested in the dichotomy where women are seen as aggressive when they act the same way that their male counterparts act, and how she handled that. It seems to me like she wouldn't have taken that critique. Like she would continue to act in the way she did. But like whether or not that happened for her, and especially as a young woman.
That's a very interesting question. I know exactly why I didn't go there. It's funny. I also know her very well, or at least yes, very well recently. I'll put it that way, because we were in the same office building, and I met her many years ago when she was first starting out. I don't think she even had a license when I met her. A mutual friend introduced us, but we didn't maintain a relationship all those years. And then we reacquainted when she moved into the same office building that I was in. That was before she became the law director. And what I know about her is that is not something that would even, it's, there are certain people who draw boundaries so well defined that folks don't cross it. Mm-hmm. And in my take on Almeda is that she would not, they wouldn't cross it, and she wouldn't notice, mm-hmm. because it just wouldn't be a factor. I am going to ask that question of her, though, because I now am curious as to whether she whether that was completely true, my take on her. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask her that question, I think, just as a friend. She's so very well respected in the legal community because of her tenacity. And I do have to say personally that during a time in Cuyahoga County when criminal attorneys did not have the benefit of discovery, prosecutors were not required to give them the discovery until just a few years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Yes. And so what that would do is most attorneys who were trying to defend their clients would plea it out, because you'd have a stack of accusations and allegations, and you didn't have much to fight with. So, but Almeda would fight. And that brought her a reputation that I don't think anyone else, certainly no other woman in Cleveland, has, that ability to take something into trial and give that person their day in court if they chose it. And so I admire her for that.
I got that impression as well, but I know that she didn't come forth from the womb with that kind of confidence and verve. So I'd be interested in how she got to that point.
Well, and I also, and I'm not going to speculate about how. I think I will ask her, though.
Okay. Do you mind if we stop for a second?
Sure.
So everyone you interviewed, did you know ahead of time?
I had met a couple. Well, I knew 2 of the people. I'd met in passing one. So let's say I at least had an acquaintance, a hello kind of acquaintance with all of them.
Mm-hmm. Would you do any further research, or would you kind of review in your mind what you knew about them so that you could kind of prepare for what kind of follow-up questions you wanted to ask?
Could you ask that again, please?
Like before you had your interview, as you were kind of looking over the questions to become familiar with them, would you review in your mind like what you knew about that person in order to think about not only the questions that were on the interview schedule, but also what kinds of follow-up questions you would ask?
Only Mary. Only my spouse. Actually, because Attorney Johnson was such an integral player in the city, I did think about her a bit as a person who was in the city, and I wondered how much of that part of her work she would want to discuss. But other than that, no. And there were actually great surprises for me. In at least 2 of the interviews, I naively presumed that one person had a much longer interaction and contact with the city of East Cleveland than he did, and the other one I had just the opposite. I had no idea that there was such a long history of work or interaction with the city. So I don't think, as I looked at the questions, I only focused on the questions. I didn't focus on what I would ask as a follow-up. It was just I didn't want to wonder what the next question was as I was talking to the person, because I didn't want them to feel like they were waiting for me to get myself together for the questions.
And how was the actual logistics of setting up the interview?
You mean like calling them and making an appointment? Oh my goodness. That's the hardest part, to tell you the truth. People, I think, there's a little bit of trepidation about doing the interview. So any little thing that could make a change or make it something to postpone happened, almost everything. So the one person I really wanted to interview, I never did get a chance to. So
I only ask because I think that that's the thing that probably everyone's talked about, being like just on a day-to-day grind kind of thing. Like that was like the
day of cancellations and the
yeah.
I had one person who lost the permission form 3 times.
Well, how about the informed consent? Was that how did that process work for you? Was that something that was easy to take care of? Did you have enough time to get them the consent form ahead of time, or did that create some sort of like gap?
Well, I had enough time to get consent forms. What happened a couple of times is that people were right at the edge of the timeline. So they got a consent form, cancellation, postponement, cancellation, postponement. It was time for a new consent form, so I had to send them another consent form and then set another date. And so it was that kind of thing. But the consent form itself, most people didn't have. I didn't get one question, I don't think, or concern. I'll put it that way. Not one concern about signing it.
And everybody felt comfortable being videotaped? Like, did they know ahead of time?
Yes, no one asked me not to turn off the tape. No one asked me. I'm trying to remember if anyone asked me to change my line of questioning. I don't think that happened either. I kind of expected that. That's enough. Or, in fact, some people took me places that really surprised me with, naming names and stuff of other people in their families that really surprised me. So
I guess we're going to continue in that same vein. What did you find most surprising or most challenging about the work?
Most surprising. By far, the most challenging part was the logistics. I enjoy interacting with people, so the conversations themselves were quite delightful. Just getting the camera, moving the camera, signing it out, making sure I got it back without feeling guilty that I held it too long, so the next person could use it. I felt pretty independent about it because I didn't have to coordinate it with another person. I did all my interviews by myself. I really liked doing it that way. It's, maybe another time I would try it another way. But.
Well, I think that's an important perspective to have, because most of the people worked in pairs, and so I think that was the way we envisioned, or that was the way it was envisioned in the beginning, was to have people start as partners and then, get comfortable enough to do it by themselves.
Ah, okay.
So it's good to hear that perspective, because I know a lot of people still really enjoy working with partners for various reasons, but I like to have your perspective that it was at least easier for you to coordinate because you were working by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever feel overwhelmed with trying to control the camera and do the interview at the same time?
I might not have done a very good job of it, but I felt comfortable. It's it would be different if there was more action in the video. But because it's an interview that is really focused on the questions and the conversation, everything is pretty stable. You're in the same space all the time. As long as you can see, glance over every now and then at the monitor to make sure the person's still in frame. And sometimes that worked well, and sometimes it didn't work as well as I wanted it to. But I think that would have been the case even if I'd had another person. So I felt comfortable with that. And for me, what I didn't, working with another person would have required us to be really in sync, because you're asking that one question and the camera person moves and everything's lost. So I wanted the people to completely forget that there was a camera there. Just talk to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, I also noticed that your interviews tended to be longer than anyone else's. It's not a critique.
Okay.
And I'm wondering if that was because you and the interviewee felt comfortable extending it as long as possible. And I think from having done these interviews that sometimes when people are working as partners, like they would feel pressured to be more respectful of the time, or like they were just more aware of that they might be exceeding the time that they had put by.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's something that I want to think about, like as far as, you know, the pros and cons of sending people out as pairs.
Well, in my case, we talked about, each of the interviewees and I talked about how long it might take. And I explained that some interviews were quite short, maybe an hour and a half, and some extended far beyond that. It all depended on, you know, what came out in the interview. So people, when they scheduled time with me, they had that already in their minds, that, you know, it might take long. One of my interviews went on to an extra memory chip. and it was the interviewee's chip. So, but he was very comfortable. He wanted to say those words. He didn't want to leave things out. And in fact, when we were done, he then wanted to show me some of his awards and things. So I had that on camera as well. I think the danger of going too long, which for me means, going too long means that the interviewee doesn't want to continue, but you're continuing anyway. That's what it means for me. The danger of doing that comes when you're not clear on whether it's an open-ended interview or whether it's closed and time-specific, and whether you've boxed yourself into a time frame that won't allow you to go on even if you want to. I heard some people say that they wanted to go back and continue an interview, and I think for me that would be impossible. I think if I went to get a second interview, it would be another interview. It just wouldn't be the same one. And and that might be good too, to go back on another day and see if the person's in a different state of mind. That would be good too. But I couldn't conceive of it as being an extension of the first interview.
And what was the most surprising aspect?
Well, content-wise, hands down, it was when one of my interviewees described his brother as a child molester and said his name and described the entire encounter, you know, the all of the information around it. That surprised me. So in terms of content, that surprised me.
Did you ask him if he wanted to keep them?
Yes, I did. And he said absolutely. Another interview surprised me in its resoluteness. I interviewed someone that I had worked with on a committee, and when I asked if there was any dream or any idea that person had for improving East Cleveland, and the flat out answer was no. And tried to move it, and I tried to see if there was anything underneath it that was a little bit more optimistic, and there was nothing there. And it kind of surprised me, but I understood it, but it did surprise me.
So how do you feel like you were able to handle both of those instances?
Well, I think I probed appropriately when the person was completely pessimistic about East Cleveland and what could happen to improve it. I think I probed to see if there was something else, and when there wasn't, that's just the way it is, no value stated in it, but it just kind of surprised me not because I haven't heard that attitude many times in East Cleveland from many people, but because of the context. This person is very creative, extremely creative artist. So usually artists and engineers, I say, can fix anything. Give them gaffer's tape and, a paintbrush or something, and they can solve the world's problems. And so it surprised me personally that there were no suggestions or ideas. In the other situation, there was a little bird inside my head saying, "No, he didn't." No, he didn't say that. But on the other hand, I understood how serious it was, the context again, that he wants to see, he's an elder, he wants to see the children of the future in a safer, more wholesome, healthy environment, and he is sworn to himself to do anything that will make that happen. And so the conversation was in that context, and so I understood it, and I said, well, that's the way that is.
So thinking back to the very beginning of the project, and after your training, how did what you actually do differ than what you thought you were going to be doing?
Excuse me for coughing. Well, the actual interviews, I don't think my expectations changed. I thought I would do more interviews than I did. But in terms of quantity, it changed. But our brainstorming about what could be done with the material is still in process. And actually, I think it's more, the line of its process is more in keeping with what my expectations were. I guess just because I'm older, I always think things are going to take longer than you expect, and it's not going to be as easy as we want it to be.
And did you feel like the interviews would you describe the interviews as intense?
I think my capacity for intensity is much greater than most people. So, no. One word answer.
Would you recommend other people participate in a project like this in the future?
As interviewers or interviewees?
Both.
I knew you would say both if I asked that. I think it's very important that people learn interviewing skills, because if they can, they'll learn a lot about themselves, and I think they'll learn a lot about their neighbors, people who they encounter. I think that interviewees, I think that helps people feel like they're being heard and listened to. So yeah, there are a couple of people on my street that I wanted to interview. 3, actually, on my street. One of the 3 I did not have the courage to ask. The 2 others said no, and both of them cited being afraid that if they said something that our government didn't like, that they might be have undue focus of attention. And so, I mean, I do understand. I understand that there's a vulnerability in expressing yourself, and whether it's real, whether the feeling is based on reality or not, it would affect the interview anyway. So
what advice would you give future community researchers?
Really, really listen to the ethics pieces, the training. Very valuable. Goes far beyond the value of the project. Take it seriously. Be interviewed. I think that would help, so you can see what it feels like on the other side. Now, having said that, I have not been interviewed for this project yet. Maybe, I don't know if that is still a possibility or not, but I have been interviewed in a lot of other situations, so being interviewed is important. If you start it, stick with it, because other people depend on it. And, sometimes things come up and you can't do anything better, but if you start something like this, it's important to continue it. Mostly because communities are always the victims of projects that start, and then they, you look around and they're not there anymore, or you start an endeavor and look around and that was last year's, event. So especially for communities like East Cleveland, if you start it, continue.
I do feel like the people that were here when I came in, that I don't know that luck has anything to do with it, but I feel incredibly positive about how committed and how serious everyone takes it. I don't feel like anyone was just like, yeah, sure, it's Tuesday, I'll go, just do this for fun.
Yeah.
I feel like everyone was really like on board with like what kind of project this was going to be. So I felt like that was really just amazing to be part of. So
I agree.
So what is your definition of social justice? Shifting gears.
Really? Goodness. Social justice. Well, let me preface it by saying that my motto is, because justice requires it, I persist. And for me, social justice can be seen as an umbrella statement for all the ways in which we treat people fairly. Whether it's based on the systems and administrative processes that we set up in our cities or in our villages, or as Martin Luther King would say, hamlets, although I'm not sure where the hamlets are in the United States. Those things that are in place to move almost automatically, that protect and support the growth and transcendence of its citizens and the people who interact with it. Or whether it's the interpersonal interactions that sometimes are an outgrowth of those systems, the permissive interactions that our society says are appropriate to do. For example, in the way that it changes your vision of what's just and fair. We have decided collectively, no matter which side of the attitude you stand vis-a-vis African Americans, the N-word is not something that's an okay word to assault someone with. We haven't completely decided that with words like faggot or homo. It's still a mixed social attitude, a set of attitudes. And that's based on the fact that our governmental structures haven't decided yet whether it's okay or not. And that's one place where trickle down does help. When you set a law in motion, thankfully we have our three parts of government, one that is sort of like majority rules, but the other is like, what's just? You know, the final arbiters of justice. And when you have the courts that will say, no, 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 you can't do that anymore, or yes, 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 you must do this because it's fair, then it trickles down into the meat of the society. So for me, social justice is that place where you can manipulate and enforce and grow fairness in all of those different kinds of venue, if that makes any sense. And that's speaking as a person who, for whom that is not my profession in a certain sense, but I guess in another sense it is.
And has that definition changed over the course of this project?
I think it's been enhanced. In fact, I think that the people who were drawn to this project had some sense of social justice. Now, we may not define it as well as the professional person who works in that field, but I think we must have had that in order to convene and agree to do this kind of project. Otherwise, otherwise it would be too time consuming. It would be, certainly not financially rewarding in any large sense. So it had to be that commitment, and that's what I recognize around the room and as I sit and look at the other people who participated.
Great. Do you think the kind of work involved in the Voicing in Action project is important for social justice work?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, in this city, it may be one of the most important things happening. It's a lot. If we could extend it, I know that it's coming to, some phases of it are coming to a close. But if we could extend it to increase the number of people who are interviewed, for example. Just the fact of people being interviewed, being asked, how do you think, what do you think about this? How do you feel about this? Where do you stand vis-a-vis this city? Where do you stand vis-a-vis this community? Just that really supports this community, because part of what the dilemma is in East Cleveland is that people aren't listened to. You know, it's a city itself that's listened to less than other cities. I was talking with another relative of mine just earlier today, and he said he doesn't work in any municipal government. And he said, we were talking with the mayor. Now, he lives in one city, I live in another city, and the city of Cleveland is the third city. He was talking about the city of Cleveland. But the mayor was the city of Cleveland's mayor. He wasn't talking about my mayor. And I knew that. He knew, I knew. And so there are some places, some locations, and some times when that entity is less obviously important. And so then when you drill down and you see the people who are part of that group, that municipality, feel less important. So just doing that uplifts the hearts and the minds and the attitudes of the people in East Cleveland. So if nothing more, that would be of benefit. But I think it has far-reaching values beyond that. Because once you get people talking, there are things that come out that are ideas that are just beautiful. I think one of the ideas that came out was a newspaper. Now we have a newspaper. We have a news presentation that came almost directly out of this project. Yeah, it's a good idea.
So can you tie that directly to your ideas about social justice then? This idea of listening to people, or like allowing space for people to have a voice. How does that connect to your idea of social justice as kind of what you said about a way to enhance or grow or manipulate fairness?
Wow. Let's see. You're asking me to tie
like the kind of work that we're collecting oral life narratives and using them to create community dialogues
to a sense of how we accentuate fairness and grow it. Well, the more that people feel comfortable sharing that idea that they've been carrying around with them, and it's just been sitting in their brain, the more they feel comfortable doing that, the more there is a chance that they will find like-minded people who will bond with them to create the change that they think is needed. And that is democracy at work. Now, before I talked about the couple of different areas of government, when you have a democratic system like ours, a representative democracy, you have obviously the vote, where people's opinions get codified in a way because they put their money where their mouths are, or they put their vote where their ideas are, hopefully, and they support a person who has the kind of idea that they have about how the government should affect its citizens. And that's majority rule. And sometimes that goes on and on and on, even after there are obvious ways in which it's not fair to the others. So when others all speak up and they start listening to each other, then they find out that maybe there's a third way or a fourth way or a fifth way that everyone can get their needs met, and life becomes more fair for everyone. It's kind of an abstract way to do it, but another idea about how it connects to fairness is it's once you feel empowered to speak, then you feel more encouraged to do. And if you feel encouraged to do and you take responsibility for your actions, then you have a stronger community. And stronger communities, free people, free people. It's a phrase that's been going through my mind. It's not one I created, but it's a real special statement for me, because in freeing ourselves, uplifting our individual selves, we often support the collective.
Awesome, thank you. Following up on that, do you feel more empowered?
As a result of the project? Well, yeah, I think I feel encouraged because however humble the responsibility is, being a community researcher means that I'm doing something concrete that's in support of the transformation of our communities. And I've been looking for a way to do that. I've described East Cleveland at various times, more or less positively. Sometimes it feels like a friend or an acquaintance who has already told you they can't swim very well, and now I see them in the pond. And then the question is, how do you best save them without harming yourself? Now, I don't always see East Cleveland that way. There are times when I see it much more positively than that. And this project helps me to keep my eyes open for those opportunities as well. The dilemma is trying to figure out how we can increase our capacity for self-help. And all the different ways in which we can do that.
So backing up a little bit, at the beginning you said that you were involved in the steering committee. How did you come to be involved with the Voicing in Action project?
There was an announcement made at a community meeting. Dr. Rhonda made the announcement that they were looking for people who were interested. It was at the very beginning. They were looking for people who were interested in being researchers, being on the steering committee, and or being interviewed. And I wanted to be a part of the steering committee because I wanted to steer it. I wanted to lend my voice in making it as functional as possible. I think there had already been a couple of meetings. I signed up for it and went to a few more. I knew I enjoy using cameras. I don't do it very well, but I enjoy it. And so I enjoy interviewing people, so I figured I'd be an interviewer as well. And somewhere in there I had the idea that I might be interviewed too. So, but it was at a community meeting. Trying to think of which one. I used to go to a lot more of them than I do now, to tell you the truth. I can't remember which one.
Okay. How do you feel like this project, or do you feel like this project has changed the community and the participants?
Well, each one of the participants have told me they really enjoyed it, and I know at least one who has watched her own interview a couple of times. So on that level, on the individual level of the people who have been interviewed, since I don't know which ones have received their interviews back, I don't know which ones have and which ones haven't. I have a tendency to just wait until they speak to me about it. I think the programs that have been held at the library that show excerpts from the various interviews, I think anything we do that in that regard, where people can have a mirror held up, is helpful. It can't be anything but helpful. I have not seen, I haven't seen direct connections in other ways, to tell you the truth. So I'm still waiting for that in a way.
And how do you feel like it's impacted you and the cohort of community researchers?
Well, first of all, we've made some new friends and acquaintances. We've worked together on something that I think we all believe is valuable, so we've increased our respect for each other. There's a pride in doing work that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, sort of seeing it through. There's a pride in that regardless of what the task is, frankly, you feel like you've been through it together. You're walking down the street, you might pass 20 people and be fairly dismissive of them just because you don't know them and you're on your way to wherever you're going. But in this situation, we've had to stop and attend to each other on a regular basis over the past, how long? 2 years. And that really does make a difference in how you see the person the next time. So that's a valuable thing. I, in a certain sense, live in East Cleveland and work elsewhere for my well, not this summer, but for almost all of my legal career. And so it's easy to leave out in the morning, not come back till late at night. It's easy to do that. It's easy to, get off, leave my office at 5 o'clock in the evening, go to a 6 o'clock meeting, may sometimes to an 8 o'clock meeting, and then come home and, enjoy my family and not see anyone else in East Cleveland. I've lived a lot of my life like that. But going to the Voicing in Action project, I may not be in East Cleveland, but I'm sitting with East Clevelanders when we're at our meetings and talking about East Cleveland and being engaged in East Cleveland in a way that's non-combative, which was very important to me. I don't think we've had one harsh word spoken in the group in 2 years. Do you know how special that is in East Cleveland in particular?
I'm learning.
And you want to give and you want to help so much. And you sit down with other people and, in this case, cooperative, complementary, meaning one person has one idea and the other person has another idea and they fit together. That's been very special to me because I've tried another venue and that has not been the case.
this is the last question. What would you improve or change about the project?
I'd give it more money. Because some of the ideas that were generated and may not come to fruition, to tell you the truth, are excellent ideas. And with more resources, they would be really, really very beneficial. Not saying that the ideas that we're moving forward with are not beneficial also, but with more resources. The involvement of more sectors of the community would be possible. And in just the way that we could maximize, remember earlier I said something about maximizing the capacity for self-help. This is one of the means by which that could occur.
Okay, and how did you feel about the feedback you received on your interviews?
I wanted more.
So,
and that's, well, that would be me regardless. You need to know that about me, because I do.
Because it's kind of late in the game now, but I think that personally what I could have done better was meet with people individually and offer feedback rather than doing it over email. I think that I think going forward that would be something that I would change.
Well, not in your defense, although you don't need any. We're working with a bare bones staff. The amount of work that you have to do to just log in those interviews is unbelievable to me. And that's one of the things I was thinking about when I said money. We could do 10 times more things if we had like 3 more people on staff, for example. And that's, I sadly, that is the problem with almost every social justice action that ever happens in this country. It's always limited by the amount of resources that are invested in it and required very often to do magnificent things to demonstrate its value. And that's part of the dilemma, and that's the actually that's the conundrum of that is the United States. So just let us have LeBron's salary for a year, maybe.
Is there anything that you would like to add?
Oh, I would offer a suggestion that we really do our first interviews with each other in the future.
Now, I know that you were hesitant to do an interview at the beginning.
I was.
Why have you changed your mind?
Let's see, why have I changed my mind? Have I changed my mind is the question. I think I've changed my mind. Today I've changed my mind. In the beginning, actually not in the beginning, somewhere in the middle, when it was very combative in this city, there were lots of things going on, and people were choosing sides, who was on whose side.
Are you talking about the election?
Yeah, I'm not just talking about the election. I'm talking about living every day.
Mm-hmm.
And the election was a part of it, a big part of it. And it was very contentious. And it seemed to be more important to choose one side or the other than to work for justice. I'll put it that way. And I didn't want to be sucked into that. And I think I've managed to keep myself in that position that, if you're walking down the path of justice, we're walking on the same path, regardless of who you are. And that's the way I intend to keep it.
All right. Anything else?
No, but thank you. Thank you for all the work you do. And thank you for participating in this project and being so open to this, let's say, what is it, 85% African American community, and doing your job in the kind of ardent way that you do it.
Well, thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate that.